What's up, class, and welcome to another lesson in the No Mod Shop class here on the Skooled Zone. I mentioned in part 3 of my Let's Build in Far Harbor series that I've been loving the helpful comments that have been rolling in, and there have been some really good ones. I shouted out a few people in the last episode from comments in the previous episode, while some other great ones rolled in that I will implement in the next part of that series. But I also noticed that while I was editing that episode, I kept having to run over and hit the interval switch for the clear weather shells because, as you know, Far Harbor is ridiculously rainy. But it started to become a distraction from the lesson and even annoyed some people. But keep in mind, I'm doing that so you guys can actually see what's on the screen and it's not too dark or loud because of the rain. However, one viewer reminded me that the power counters can be used to time the shell shots out automatically. So I jumped at the chance to make a video about that because for the longest time I've been trying to think of a practical use for the power counters and I couldn't think of one. I think maybe they can be useful if you're going to make certain light box animations, but I haven't gone down that road yet. But they don't really have like an ordinary practical application until now. The viewer goes by Lord Rye Bowie Woodham, which is a mouthful, but thank you so much for the suggestion. You rock. Now, just to change things up, we're here at the rainiest location in the regular Commonwealth, Somerville Place. I did my epic UFO build here, so if you haven't seen that video, links in the description and the iCard above. But I thought it would be useful to test out this daisy chain contraption here first before I build it in Far Harbor. Now, I use the term daisy chain, which is actually a real term in electronics to mean a series of devices all linked up in an ordered sequence to produce a specific function. And that's the case with the power counter. It really can't be used just by itself very effectively. I'll show you why in a moment. Oh, and I don't think it comes from any DLC, so everyone should have it in their vanilla menu. Now, the power counter is a tricky beast because it doesn't function intuitively. It doesn't turn on until it hits a designated number, and it stays on until it cycles through to its reset. So if you actually want to turn it right back off again, you have to add another switch after it, and it doesn't cycle itself until the power coming into it shuts on and off. So you have to add another switch before it. So let me show you how I would set this up. Okay, so we're just gonna build it right here, and it's perfect because it's raining here. All right, so I have a generator up in my UFO up there. It's cool. You guys will have to check out that video if you haven't seen it. So I'm just going to set up a small generator right here. And in order to program all the switches, we're going to need a terminal. So I'm going to set the terminal right here. And then the power counter is in the connectors and switches right here. Now, if you read the description of it, it's not entirely accurate, actually. They could have done a much better job describing what it actually does. It says, it transmits power briefly after cycling power 10 times. That's totally inaccurate. It doesn't transmit power briefly. It keeps the power on, and it doesn't turn on by itself. You actually have to keep feeding it little bursts of power for it to rotate or, to move to the next counterpoint. The only thing true about this statement is the power 10 times. I think the default setting is 10, so that's good. So we're going to leave it at 10. So I'm going to set that right there. And then we need that interval switch to keep the power popping on and off for it to cycle. And then we don't want the firework mortar to shoot off more than one shell at a time, if we're using the clear weather shells at least. So we need a way for it to turn on just for a second and then turn right back off again. So I'm going to use the delayed off switch. And just to test this out before we start shooting shells off, I'm going to just grab one of these construction lights. All right, so let's hook this up. So I'm going to hook that up to here. And then as soon as power starts running, this is going to start counting. So we still need to program it. So I'm just going to skip the power counter for a moment because, like I said, I think its default setting is 10. But these aren't necessarily what we want. So I'm going to hook that up and that up. Okay? So here's what we want to do. So we want to go into the terminal here, and we want to set the delayed switch, the delayed off switch, to 1 second. All right, because that's about the time that it needs to shoot off a shell, and then we want it to turn right back off again before it shoots another shell, because you load all your firework shells into the mortar at once, so you don't have to keep running back and reloading. So we're going to set it to 1. Yeah, the technical term for them is weather change shells. And then we're going to exit out of that. And then we're going to go up to the interval switch. And we just want little bursts of power, 1 second each, to get that counter to keep moving on to its next setting. So we're going to do the same thing with the interval switch. And we're going to set the on time to 1. And we're going to set the off time to 1. Okay, I'm going to come back and talk about how to time this out, but let's just see how this works real quick, because we wouldn't want to leave this setting on just 1. We actually want it to be a little bit more than that, but at least we can see what's going on here, okay? So there we go. It keeps turning on and off. Perfect. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the timing of this, okay? So this power counter, once it's hooked up, will move with this each time it gets a burst of power 1 second per count, okay? We have it 1 second per single digit rotation. So we have this already set to 10 because that's its default. And if we just keep this at 1 and 1, then this is going to go off every 10 seconds, okay? So we don't want the fireworks shell shooting off every 10 seconds. So we're going to change this to 10 seconds off. All right, we just want the burst of power for 1 second, but we want it to stay off for 10 seconds. So we're going to go back here and set this off time to 10 seconds, okay? Okay, so now what it's going to do is it's going to keep counting each time that little red light flashes. That's a second. And then once it hits 10 seconds, it comes on and off, as you just saw. Okay, so now we can hook up the power counter. All right. So this is going to count to 10 seconds, and then it's going to rotate once. See? You just see that? And it's going to count another 10 seconds, and then it's going to rotate to 2. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward the footage, or I'm going to speed up the footage until we get to 10, and then you'll see that construction light turn on for 1 second, okay? So check it out. All right, and now when it gets to 0, it's going to reset and flash that power on for 1 second. The construction light should turn on. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we know it works. Now, I actually timed it with a stopwatch during my test, and it does count accurately in real time, you know? So just remember that the reason it doesn't have a 10 on it is because it's counting 0 from 0 to 1 as its first second. So it actually is 10 seconds. So a 10-second counter on the interval switch times the 10-second counter on the power counter comes out to 100 seconds. Which is 1 minute and 40 seconds. And each interval switch or power counter you add will multiply that by power of 10. So if you wanted more time in between the clear weather shell shooting off, then you would just add one of those, set it to 10, and then you have multiples of that. So if you have 3 of them instead of 2, it'll be 10 to the power of 3, which is 1,000 seconds, or about 16 and a half minutes. 4 of them would be 10,000 seconds, which is about 2 hours and 45 minutes. You get the idea. In fact, if you do the math, you could actually time it out so that you could start things at 8 a.m. and end at 8 p.m. or something like that. Anyway, you guys get the idea. However, it gets a little tricky if you want to shoot for multiples in between 10. And that's because the computer that controls a switch is actually hooked up to the same power source as the other devices, and they don't separate out each switch in the terminal, individually. So if you change one, it's going to change them all. Therefore, if you wanted one interval switch that only counted to say 4 seconds, you would have to hook the computer up to a separate temporary generator, hook it up to a new interval switch before you attach to the daisy chain. But it could be done. So you would just do the math like this. 4 times 10 times 10 equals 400 seconds, divided by 60 equals 6 minutes and 40 seconds, which might be better for Summerville Place here, instead of Far Harbor. Back at Dalton Farm, I'll probably shoot for like 200 seconds, which would shoot off a shell every 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Hopefully I did the math on that right. I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments if I didn't. So let's replace this with the firework mortar. Here, I'm just gonna temporarily turn off the generator, and the easiest way to reset this is just to store it and rebuild it. So I'm just gonna store it and rebuild it here, and then the firework mortar is in the miscellaneous section right here. All right, so I'm going to exit. I'm going to transfer my shells in there, which are for some reason stored in the My Miscellaneous section. But you can do a sort by weight, and it'll actually bring them close to the top, even though it says they weigh 0. So I'm going to load 8 shells into there. Go back into Workshop. Connect the power. And then turn this on. And by the time I turn it on, it'll probably be a sunny day again. That's hilarious. Okay, so here we go. And as before, I'll just speed up the footage until we get to 9 so you guys can see the clear weather shell shoot off. All right, here we go. It should shoot off now. There we go. Nice, and we have a nice sunny day again. All right, fantastic, fantastic. So you can Wi-Fi glitch these actually, but since this isn't something that's really going to be on display in your settlement, what I would probably do and what I'm going to do here is actually build a little shed, somewhere way out back, and then just hide it in the shed. The interesting thing though about the clear weather shells is that if there's a roof over them and they can't shoot up into the sky, they actually won't work. So what I would do with a little shed is just not put a roof over that, or maybe I might use the angled one so it shoots out of a window or something. Now, once you program everything, you can actually get rid of the terminal. So this is one item that I could go ahead and store. But the rest of these I would need to have all hooked up together just like that. And I'll probably leave this generator as well so I can have it on a separate terminal system than some of the cool things I have up in my UFO there. So that's what I would probably do. And as you can see in the back there, I've already started adding some of the signal interceptor parts and stuff like that to make sure I have all those set up, at least one of them at every settlement in my little console here, All right, fantastic. So this is going to be fun to set up in Far Harbor, and I'll just have to time it out and see, exactly how many minutes, the approximate time in between a clear weather shell is needed. Obviously, 100 seconds, a minute and 40 seconds is too much here for Somerville Place because it hasn't even started raining yet and it already shot off another one. So I'm actually going to disconnect this wire right here and then time it out. It's probably going to be more like the 16 minutes, that I mentioned earlier. I might do something like this. Got my little weather station back here. So I set up one extra interval switch there so that it's going to shoot off about every 16 minutes or so. So that way, it's timed a little bit better here for Somerville Place. I'll have to work on the timing over at Dalton Farm and see what the best setting is for that. But as you can see, I've got the angled firework mortar now. So it's going to shoot up just past the lip of that roof there and make it up to the sky. If I need to make any adjustments, I've got access. It's nice and covered. All the electronics are covered from the rain, just for role-playing purposes. And got my relay dish on the top to check the weather. It's my Doppler or whatever. So anyway, it's all coming together. You gotta love it. Now, I know invariably somebody's going to mention in the comments that you can actually program the firework mortar as well to have its input. However, I've tested it out and it's not super reliable. So you don't know if you need 1 second or half a second or whatever. So what I usually do is just leave that to the default setting and use that interval switch. All right, folks, so that's how it works. Finally, you have a use for that item buried in the switches menu. And by the way, it doesn't have to be just used for clear weather shells. Let's say you wanted to make a haunted house build and you always wanted it to be dark and stormy at that location. You could substitute the clear weather shells for the rainy shells. Or maybe you have a mod or a perk that makes you immune to radiation and you have a settlement that's inhabited only by pacified monsters that love radiation too. So you could have a perpetual rad storm at that location by substituting the rad storm shells. Or, you know, as far as the fireworks shells, you could even build like a Disney-type castle and time the math out with the counters so that it shoots off fireworks every night at 9 p.m. You know, there are a lot of creative possibilities. Anyway, thanks again, guys, for all the great comments as well as the likes and the shares. I'll see you in the next video. Happy building and class dismissed.